When it comes to my favourite horror film of the year, like Game Maker's Toolkit, I always try to pick the one I personally find the most unique, as opposed to necessarily the best. While Smile was probably the one I found most scary, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies being the most fun, Speak No Evil certainly being the most soul-destroying, and Everything Everywhere All at Once being my all-round genre favourite, Mad God is a different beast entirely. Now, for clarity, there are a fair few films I haven't seen in 2022 because either they didn't release where I was, or I simply didn't have the time to watch them, so personally anticipated films like The Menu and Pearl haven't been considered when making this video. I also recommend not eating while watching this one because while the video is censored in accordance to YouTube's guidelines, there are some utterly repulsive visuals in here. Like, seriously, I'm about to cover Cronenberg's Crimes of the Future, and it doesn't hold a candle to the deplorably grotesque stuff you'll see in Mad God, so you've been warned. Anyway, as a sucker for adult animated horror, given its extremely rare appearances in media, particularly in feature film, and also the fact I have a degree and teach part-time in animation, there's nothing I love more than seeing imagination flourish without boundaries or restraint. From the extraordinarily vivid mind of Academy Award-winning Phil Tippett, a 45-year veteran of animation and visual effects, responsible for the magic behind classics such as Star Wars, RoboCop, Starship Troopers, and Jurassic Park, to name a few, Mad God could be considered his definitive auteur magnum opus. Returning to his roots as a stop-motion animator after shelving the project for over 2 decades, Mad God tells the story of a faceless, voiceless protagonist known as the Assassin, as they descend into a hellish, post-apocalyptic, monstrous abyss to seemingly destroy it, while along the way encountering various creatures, critters, and unspeakable evils that relish in misery and destruction across an unpredictable landscape. As far as plot is concerned, Mad God doesn't follow a conventional coherent narrative. While there is a very loose 3-act structure, you pretty much have to piece everything together for yourself, from the very distinct choice in visuals and absence of dialogue. At its core, Mad God is a fiercely uncompromising experimental film that's meaning can be explained with simply its title. What you are seeing is a Mad God's creation, Phil Tippett, specifically in the case of this metaphor, of what happens when given the ultimate power to create anything and everything without constraint, and just as equally destroy it. The world we witness is one in which God has now abandoned us to our ugly, self-serving ways. In the despair of nihilism, it would be better if there was no God, but instead, the one we got was like if Sid from Toy Story had his way with the world, only to feel utterly ashamed at what it's become. It is a truly depressing place, presented to us like a nightmarish version of Disney's Fantasia, with its gruelingly unending stream of consciousness of humanity's worst features: animal cruelty, human torture and experimentation, the death penalty, the greed and gluttony of man, both figuratively and literally, the oppression of the masses, war and nuclear fallout, murder brothels, natural disasters, a graveyard of genocide, prophecies of the apocalypse, the plague, cosmic existentialism, a lighthouse because they're always creepy. In fact, the only terrible thing that's missing is fucking Twitter. A lot of this will sound sporadic and convoluted, but that is largely how the film feels. You don't have to get it, but I will try to make sense of its conclusions later in the video. For now, treat it as a glorious celebration of the macabre, the imaginable unimaginable, the dark, deep pit of the angry, morbid, somber, and depraved parts of our creativity and wonder. Mad God is visceral to a fault. It is art in the purest sense of the word. It's not so much throwing paint at a canvas as it is propelling emotions at the viewer to invoke an honest reaction. I understand many will dismiss it as shocking and gross for the sake of effect, but sometimes the goal is meant to slap you in the face whether you like it or not. I genuinely believe there is thought placed behind the choice in visuals, as I'll explain later, but the point of deferring a traditional story lets the skill and ambition speak for itself. I know it's cliched to say style is the substance, but consider your reaction the same way artists like Hieronymus Bosch were perceived in their time. It's polarizing in two extremes. It's ugly and gross and thus somehow equates to lowbrow and offensive, while on the other hand, it's harrowing and upsetting because it reflects genuine human fears and anxieties. My interpretation of the story is pretty dark, but a lot of that comes from a place of genuine reaction. It energized me in a way that's difficult to explain, but the fact that it is difficult to explain makes it all the more personal to me. In the case of most horror animation I deeply admire, such as the work of Lee Hardcastle and David Firth, it's the combination of the uncanny and abstract I enjoy, specifically gritty, realistic, and sometimes live action, existing in the same stylized space as expressionism. I don't talk about experimental films, games, and other media on this channel, but they make for an unusual palate cleanser to me by completely overhauling that constant need for purpose and meaning with stimuli that merely exists to heighten the senses. One way I look at Mad God is like when a child watches TV for the first time and they're hypnotically consumed by the barrage of imagery reflected into their eyes as if they're witnessing something awe-inspiring and transcendent. Hell, some situations feel like a dramatic reconstruction of a child's imagination when playing with their toys, with all the dramatic sound effects and actions to go along with it. I mean, we've all been there with our hyperactive imaginations. Simply put, there's an inherent playfulness to Mad God. At times, it's oddly humorous, even evoking curiosity, as grim as it might be. However, enough with the meandering waffle here, Ryan. What the hell is actually going on? Well, here's my interpretation. Spoilers, obviously. Mad God can be basically broken up into three independent acts that connect via metaphor. The first sees the assassin travel down the decaying world to rig a bomb to explode, only to fail, be attacked and cut open by a manic doctor who extracts a strange leech baby thing. The second act sees another assassin being given the same task by the outside world, but with a different journey through a war zone, which I believe to be a flashback of how the world ended up in the state we're initially introduced to. Finally, the third act returns us to the leech baby being transported by a phantom plague doctor to a mysterious alchemist to be sacrificed to fertilize the rebirth of a new civilization. My theory from this is that the world is symbolically stylized as the human body, with the assassin, an intruder sent to seemingly destroy the evil, being this figurative hard pill to swallow down the stomach of man's very worst version of itself. Think of it as the body of Mr. Burns and you'll get what I'm going for. What we see are metaphorical reflections of man's inescapable self-destruction and decay. It's a disease of sorts, hence the eventual plague doctor transporting the innocent baby from our outside hero to restart life. When the assassin fails to set off the bomb as if the goal was to obliterate this vile, cancerous body where blood cells go to die like a pill designed to euthanize, he's dragged away by a tumorous deformity determined to keep the body alive, but only so it can keep inflicting further pain upon itself. However, the second act shows that the assassin comes from a long line of duplicates, implying a vicious cycle of man being doomed to repeat its own self-destruction. This is majorly confirmed when the creation of a new, vibrant universe simply devolves back to where it began. We're witnessing one of countless failed expeditions to stop the madness. In fact, think of it as Dark Souls. If the assassins were to succeed, it would simply shroud the world in darkness and life would cease to be. However, in failing to bring it to an end, it's inevitably doomed to start all over again. If you've made it this far, and I respect if you have, it is a really bleak play on stabilizing harmony. This is what the world has become. That's unchangeable. Nature is what it is. All you can do is let it be or put it out of its misery, but then for what? What is there to gain from nothingness? All that's left is a dark, empty abyss where death will always and forever be eternal. It doesn't really change anything. Someone still has to figuratively and literally clean this shit up. The colourful creatures at the end show beauty being fertilised by death, implying life can't evolve without the inevitable. It brought me back to the motif throughout the film of this cyclical process. Our existence is like endless clockwork, where we polish the turds of rulers and bring more pain into the world to keep the cycle alive, deep down hoping someone, someday, will finally switch the lights off.